Silent Hill was actually a 2D platformer on the Super Nintendo? Well, you'd actually have Lone Survivor, because that's pretty much what it is. Lone Survivor is a little tough to classify, as most are hesitant to admit that it's a horror game, and I could see how you could make the argument that it's really a 2D platformer adventure game with some intense segments. This game falls into that gray area of horror versus thriller or drama, like films such as Silence of the Lambs and Requiem for a Dream, but in my opinion, Lone Survivor is absolutely a horror game. In fact, it's a survival horror game, in the same vein as Silent Hill and Resident Evil. All the elements are there. Supplies and ammunition are discouragingly scarce, the environment is hostile and has an extremely limited number of safe zones. The controls are meant to be clunky and obtuse so as to favor stealth and discretion as opposed to direct confrontation, and it becomes immediately apparent that enemies are on par or above your own skill level, making every encounter a teeth-gritting struggle. And the similarities don't stop there. One of the most stress-inducing features of Lone Survivor, much like the titles that inspired it, is saving your game. The only place you can save is your apartment, which, later on, can take a long time to make your way back to. Granted, there are mirrors scattered throughout Lone Survivor that you can use to warp back to your apartment, but sometimes getting to a mirror requires trekking through an area full of monsters, and if you're low on ammo or healing items, then this can become a sweat-inducing chore, and since combat is potentially so difficult, there's no telling if you'll make it out of an encounter alive. On top of all of this, you play as a character who isn't coping so well with the situation. Several factors contribute to the deprivation of the protagonist's sanity, such as being hurt by an enemy, eating rotten food, or going for too long without sleeping. Luckily, or not so luckily depending on how you look at it, you're given pills to optionally take that will benefit your mental state or help you stay awake, but can have adverse effects on the game's outcome. In the grand scheme of things, which ending you achieve doesn't really matter if your goal is to simply complete Lone Survivor, but it can be interesting to see the varied outcomes based on which playstyle you adapted to. The game's ending isn't bad, but it isn't groundbreaking, and most players will probably see it coming halfway through, if not earlier. However, that isn't to say that it detracts from the overall experience, and Lone Survivor stuck with me long after I finished it. Lone Survivor is scary, emotional, aesthetically pleasing on a minimalist scale, and has a great soundtrack to boot. It's debatably a horror game, but I have to say that I was more frightened by it than games like The Evil Within or even Fear, which I personally think is kind of a scary game. It just goes to show that with a little money and decent graphics and sound design, you can take your indie experience a long way. What the f***? What the f*** is that f***ing shit? Oh shit!